The city pulsed with the quiet hum of a weekday evening, headlights stretching along the asphalt like veins of molten gold. Ethan Carter, a 32-year-old architect, tightened his grip on the steering wheel as he maneuvered through the familiar streets. It had been another long day at the firm, deadlines mounting, clients demanding. He exhaled sharply, willing himself to relax. Noah, his partner of 5 years, had texted earlier, "Home late, don't wait up." Lately, those messages had been more frequent. They had once shared long dinners, laughter spilling over glasses of wine. Now, they barely shared a meal. Conversations were reduced to logistics, groceries, bills, the dog's vet appointment. Well, had the warmth faded? Tonight, Ethan had taken an unfamiliar route home, not entirely by accident. He wasn't in a hurry to return to an empty apartment, where the air felt heavier than it should. The neon glow of a roadside diner blurred past his window, and then, unexpectedly, a police checkpoint materialized ahead. Red and blue lights flickered in rhythmic warning, officers in reflective vests waving cars to a stop. Ethan's pulse ticked up, not because he had done anything wrong, but because something about checkpoints unsettled him. The way they forced stillness, demanded attention. He rolled down his window as an officer approached. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform fitting snugly over a lean, muscular frame. Officer Gabriel Torres, his face illuminated by the nearby street lamp, was unexpectedly striking. Deep brown eyes, sharp jawline, lips that seemed caught between a smirk and something unreadable. "License and registration, please," Gabriel said, his voice smooth but authoritative. Ethan complied, handing over the documents. Gabriel scanned them, then glanced back at him. "Long night?" Ethan hesitated. It was a simple question, but something in the way the officer asked it felt personal. "Yeah," he admitted. "Work. You know how it is." Gabriel chuckled lightly, the corner of his mouth quirking up. "I do, though my long nights usually involve standing in the cold instead of drafting designs." He tapped the license against his palm. "Architect, huh?" Ethan blinked. "How did you?" Then he realized his company ID was clipped to his dashboard. Gabriel nodded toward it. "Nice firm. I've seen some of their projects around the city." Ethan smiled, something easing in his chest. "Yeah, we've had some good ones." Gabriel lingered a second longer than necessary before handing the documents back. "Everything looks good, Mr. Carter. Drive safe." But as Ethan reached for the gear shift, Gabriel added, almost offhandedly, "Next time, try the main roads. This route gets quiet at night." It was the way he said it, measured, deliberate. Not quite a warning, but not entirely casual. Ethan nodded slowly. Noted. As he drove off, he caught Gabriel's reflection in the side mirror. The officer was still watching him. The rest of the drive home felt oddly charged, as if the brief interaction had stirred something just beneath the surface. Ethan parked in the garage and sat for a moment, the engine's soft purr the only sound. Noah's car wasn't there. Ethan sighed, stepping into the dimly lit apartment. The kitchen was spotless, the absence of a used plate or coffee mug confirming that Noah hadn't been home yet. He checked his phone. No new messages. He loosened his tie, pouring himself a drink. As the amber liquid slid down his throat, he thought of Gabriel Torres. The way the officer's gaze had lingered, not intrusive, but aware. Curious. Ethan shook his head, pushing the thought aside. He told himself it was just a routine stop, just another night. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. Ethan wasn't sure why he found himself looking for the checkpoint the next evening. It wasn't on his way home, not really, but something about the encounter with Officer Gabriel Torres had lingered in his mind longer than it should have. Of course, the checkpoint was gone. Just dark pavement stretching ahead, interrupted by the occasional glow of a streetlight. Ethan exhaled, frustrated with himself. What was I expecting? He had barely seen Gabriel for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, and yet, he remembered the way Gabriel's voice curled around his words, the way his gaze lingered like an unspoken question. Shaking himself out of it, Ethan continued home, forcing thoughts of the officer into the recesses of his mind. That lasted all of 2 days. It was late afternoon when Ethan stepped into the Hollow Bean, a tucked-away coffee shop downtown. He hadn't been here in months, preferring his usual cafe near the office, but today he had needed a change of scenery. He was halfway through his cappuccino when the door chimed behind him. He glanced up absently and froze. Gabriel Torres. The officer was out of uniform, dressed in a fitted black t-shirt and jeans, the casual clothes somehow making him look even more commanding. Effortless. Undeniable. Ethan barely had time to process before Gabriel's gaze flicked to him. Recognition flashed in his deep brown eyes, followed by something else. Amusement. Maybe? Interest? Mr. Carter, Gabriel said, approaching with an easy confidence. Didn't expect to see you here. Ethan managed a small chuckle. Neither did I. But I guess the city isn't that big. Gabriel nodded toward the seat across from him. Mind if I join you? He should have said no. There was no reason to say yes. But instead, Ethan found himself gesturing to the chair. Gabriel sat, stretching one arm over the back of the seat, his posture relaxed but observant. You seemed a little surprised to see me. Ethan smirked, taking a sip of his coffee. Didn't peg you as a coffee shop kind of guy. Gabriel chuckled, his fingers drumming against the table. I like quiet places. My job doesn't give me a lot of those. Ethan nodded, studying him. It was easy to forget, sitting here, that Gabriel was the same officer who had stopped him days ago. Out of uniform, the air of authority was replaced by something more fluid, more magnetic. You live around here? Ethan asked, steering the conversation into safer waters. Gabriel shook his head. Not far, but I just got off duty. Thought I'd stop in before heading home. He paused, then added with a slight smirk, didn't expect to run into anyone interesting. Ethan's stomach tensed. It was subtle, that word. Interesting, but it unlocked something dangerous in the air between them. He cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. So, is making conversation with random civilians part of police training? Gabriel tilted his head slightly, studying him in that unshakable, quiet way of his. No, but I don't think we're strangers anymore. That shouldn't have made Ethan's pulse quicken, but it did. They talked for nearly an hour. What started as harmless small talk slipped into something deeper. How Gabriel had moved to the city 5 years ago, how he had been raised by his grandmother, how he had once dreamed of something other than law enforcement, but had stayed because it gave him purpose. Ethan, in turn, found himself opening up more than he had expected. He talked about architecture, his love for bringing forgotten spaces back to life, and, without meaning to, he let slip something about Noah. We've been together for years, Ethan said, swirling the remnants of his coffee. Things change after a while. Gabriel didn't respond right away. He studied Ethan with an unreadable expression before saying, change doesn't always mean the end. Ethan should have left then. That was the moment to cut this off, to remind himself who he was, who he belonged to. But instead, he lingered. And when Gabriel finally glanced at his watch and stood, Ethan felt something akin to disappointment. Gabriel pulled out a few bills, leaving them on the table. I've got to head out, he said, meeting Ethan's gaze. But maybe I'll see you around. Ethan hesitated. Then, before he could think better of it, he said, yeah, maybe you will. Neither of them said goodbye. Ethan sat in his car outside his apartment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Noah's car was parked in its usual spot. The lights inside were dim. He had been gone longer than he'd meant to. Longer than he had an explanation for. When he finally stepped inside, Noah was in the kitchen, rinsing out a coffee mug. His dark hair was damp from a shower, his expression unreadable. You're late, Noah said, not turning around. Ethan hesitated. Yeah, I went for a drive after work. Stop for coffee. Noah finally looked at him. His blue eyes held the weight of something unsaid, something that made Ethan's stomach twist. But all Noah did was nod. Okay, no argument. No pressing for details. It was the kind of indifference that cut deeper than anger. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing a smile. You eat? Yeah, there's some leftovers if you're hungry. Thanks. Noah left the kitchen without another word, retreating to the bedroom. A moment later, the door clicked shut. Ethan exhaled slowly. He should feel guilty. He should feel like he had done something wrong. Instead, he could only think about Gabriel Torres. And the worst part? He wanted to see him again. The first message came 3 days later. Gabriel, surprised I haven't run into you again. Ethan stared at his phone, the text innocuous on the surface, yet brimming with unspoken meaning. He shouldn't reply. He knew that. Yet before logic could catch up with impulse, his fingers moved. Ethan, I've been keeping to the main roads, just like you advised. He expected the conversation to end there. Instead, Gabriel responded almost immediately. Gabriel, smart man. But that doesn't mean you can't grab coffee again. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This was dangerous. He felt the ground shifting beneath him, the lines of right and wrong blurring. But that didn't stop him from replying. The next evening, they met at a low-lit bar on the quieter side of town. Ethan had told himself it was just a drink, just conversation, nothing more. Yet, from a moment, Gabriel slid into the seat across from him. His presence filled the space like an unspoken promise. You almost didn't show, Gabriel said, tipping his beer bottle slightly toward him. Ethan smirked, though his pulse had quickened. And yet here I am. Gabriel studied him for a moment, his gaze slow, deliberate. Yeah, he murmured. Here you are. The conversation started as it always did. Work, life, the city. But as the drinks disappeared, so did their restraint. Gabriel leaned in slightly, his voice quieter, more intimate. You know, the way you talk about architecture, it's like it's the only thing that really excites you. Ethan tilted his head. What makes you say that? Gabriel shrugged, a slow smirk forming. Because when you talk about your job, your whole face changes. When you talk about anything else, including your relationship, you don't look like a man who's happy. Ethan's breath caught. He should deny it. He should laugh it off, shift the conversation elsewhere. But instead, he just sat there, feeling exposed in a way he wasn't sure he hated. Gabriel's fingers grazed the rim of his glass, his voice quieter now. When was the last time you felt alive, Ethan? A pause. A question that wasn't really about work. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. It started small. A brush of fingers when Gabriel reached for his drink. The way their knees bumped beneath the table, and neither of them moved away. The air between them grew heavier, electric, the kind of tension that didn't need words to be understood. At some point, Gabriel's hand landed on Ethan's wrist. A light touch, fleeting, but unmistakably intentional. Ethan swallowed hard, staring at the point of contact, but he didn't pull away. It would have been so easy to lean in, to fall. Instead, Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. I should go. Gabriel studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. Ethan stood, gripping his keys. But as he turned to leave, Gabriel's voice followed him. Ethan. He stopped. When he glanced back, Gabriel's gaze held him there, unwavering, waiting. A single moment stretched between them, one filled with all the things they weren't saying. Then Ethan forced himself to walk away. He told himself he wouldn't come back. That was a lie. The text didn't stop. Neither did the calls. Late at night, when Noah was asleep, Ethan would sit on the balcony, his phone glowing softly in his palm. He and Gabriel talked about everything and nothing, small, meaningless conversations that somehow felt like the most important part of his day. And yet, there was no denying it. This was already something. The physical line hadn't been crossed yet, but the emotional one? That had been obliterated. Then came a night it all unraveled. It was raining, fat, heavy drops pelting the windshield, as Ethan parked outside Gabriel's building. He shouldn't be here. He knew that. But the second Gabriel had texted, "Come over," Ethan hadn't hesitated. Gabriel opened the door before Ethan could knock. No uniform tonight. Just a dark hoodie, sweatpants hanging low on his hips. Relaxed, familiar. Like Ethan already belonged here. They didn't speak as Ethan stepped inside. Didn't speak as the door clicked shut behind him. Didn't speak as Gabriel reached for him, one hand at the back of his neck, the other at his waist, pulling him in. The first kiss was hesitation and fire all at once. Ethan had thought about this moment more times than he'd admit. But nothing compared to the reality of it. The warmth of Gabriel's mouth, the way his fingers gripped Ethan's hip, the deep, quiet sound that rumbled in his chest. Ethan's hands found Gabriel's shoulders, then his jaw, tilting him closer. Desperation eclipsed reason. Gabriel pressed him against the wall, their bodies flush, and Ethan let himself drown in it. The heat, the weight, the inevitable collapse of everything he thought he was. The night unfolded in fragments. Whispers, hands, tangled sheets, the taste of whiskey and sin. By the time Ethan finally pulled himself from the wreckage of their bodies, it was past midnight. His phone buzzed. "Noah, where are you?" Ethan stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. He had no good answer. Gabriel propped himself on one elbow, watching him. "You okay?" Ethan swallowed, nodding slowly. But he wasn't okay. He wasn't okay at all. And yet, as he looked at Gabriel, at the way the moonlight cut across his bare shoulder, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, he didn't regret it. Not yet. Ethan stood in the darkened apartment, the sound of the door clicking shut behind him far too loud in the silence. Noah was on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, his phone face down on the coffee table. He hadn't turned on the lights. Just waiting. Ethan's stomach twisted. He could still feel the phantom weight of Gabriel's hands, the taste of him lingering on his lips. He had driven home on autopilot, the guilt pressing down on him with every passing mile, yet not enough to erase the memory of what he had done. Noah exhaled slowly, his voice even. Too even. "It's late." "I know." Ethan swallowed, trying to keep his tone casual. I lost track of time." Noah's fingers curled slightly. A pause. "Then where were you?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction too long. Noah's eyes, piercing even in the dim light, flickered with something sharp. "Don't lie to me." The words settled between them like a loaded gun. Ethan's pulse thudded against his ribs. 1,000 possible answers flashed through his mind. Half-truths, deflections, anything to soften the blow of the inevitable confession. But something in Noah's expression told him it was already too late. He knew. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Noah, say it." The words were quiet but edged in steel. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. His throat tightened. He had never been good at lying, not to Noah. So he didn't. "I was with someone," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Noah leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. His face was unreadable, his knuckles white where they pressed against each other. "Was it just once?" Ethan flinched. The truth was a jagged thing, ready to tear through whatever remained between them. He could lie. He could say it didn't mean anything. But after everything, he owed Noah the truth. "No." His voice was barely audible. It wasn't just once. Noah sucked in a slow breath, then exhaled through his nose. A sharp nod. Acceptance, maybe, or restraint. Ethan watched, waiting for the explosion, the shouting, the anger he deserved. But it didn't come. Instead, Noah stood, slowly, deliberately, and walked past him. Not a word, not a glance, just the sound of their life fracturing in real time. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. The apartment felt different now, emptier, heavier. Gabriel's name was still on his phone screen, the unread message staring back at him. "Gabriel, you okay?" He hadn't replied, didn't know what to say. The guilt gnawed at him, sharp and relentless. He had spent months telling himself he was missing something, craving something, that whatever he had with Gabriel was filling a void Noah had left behind. But now, sitting in the aftermath of his choices, all he could feel was loss. He barely heard Noah enter the room. When he looked up, Noah was standing near the dresser, arms crossed over his chest. He looked calm, too calm. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a while." Noah's voice was even, controlled, devoid of warmth. Ethan's chest tightened. "Noah, wait." Noah shook his head. "No, don't." Ethan swallowed hard. "Please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" Noah let out a breathless, humorless laugh. "That you found someone else? That you lied to me for weeks?" His jaw tensed. "That you didn't even have the decency to feel guilty until now." Ethan flinched, the words hitting harder than he expected. Noah's expression flickered with something, pain, exhaustion. "Tell me something, Ethan." A beat. "Then, did you love him?" The question landed like a punch. Ethan stared, throat dry, mind racing. He didn't know how to answer. Noah gave a small, bitter smile. "That's all I needed to know." He turned toward the closet, grabbing a duffel bag. Just like that. Like they were already over. Ethan surged to his feet. Noah, please. Don't walk away. Noah zipped up the bag without looking at him. I don't think I have a choice, Ethan. The words knocked the air from his lungs. Noah turned to face him one last time. You already made that choice for me. And then, he was gone. The apartment was silent. Ethan stood in the wreckage of his decisions, staring at the empty doorway. His chest was tight, his mind a swirling mess of regret, relief, loss. His phone vibrated again. Gabriel. Ethan? For the first time, he hesitated. This was what he had wanted, wasn't it? The fire, the passion, the undeniable pull toward something new, intoxicating, different. And yet, why did it feel like he had lost more than he had gained? His fingers hovered over the screen. One message, one decision, one step forward or one step back. And still, he couldn't bring himself to reply. Not yet. Maybe not ever.